The fluorescent lights of the cold case archives of the Havenwood Police Department were never truly off. They merely dimmed to a sickly, institutional yellow after 2 a.m., casting long, dusty shadows that danced like phantoms between the endless rows of gray metal shelves. Detective Elias Thorne, a man whose face was a road map of too many late nights and too little sleep, ran a hand over his close-cropped hair. He was 48, cynical, and specialized in the cases everyone else wanted to forget, the ones that had gone stone cold, not from lack of evidence, but from an overwhelming, baffling lack of sense. He was hunting for a file on a missing person from 1998, a routine search. But what he found wasn't routine. Tucked between case file 98-401, a textbook runaway, and 98-402, a non-fatal hit-and-run, was a manila folder labeled simply, "The Void Dispatch." The folder was thinner, the cardstock slightly rougher than the department's standard issue. Elias pulled it out, a faint, metallic odor, like old pennies and ozone, wafting up from the paper. He recognized the odor. It was the smell of the old evidence lockers, a smell he rarely encountered in the modern, climate-controlled archives. Inside, there was no standard paperwork, no incident report, no witness statements, no coroner's notes. Just 2 items, a single, glossy photograph of a patrol car's back seat. It was pitch black except for a small, unidentifiable stain, dark, thick, and glistening, on the pale blue upholstery. The date stamp in the corner read, 3:07 a.m., 11/17/2005, a cassette tape, labeled in precise, archaic script, Unit 77, Final Log, Officer J.V. Sterling. Elias frowned. Unit 77 had been retired years ago, scrapped after an electrical fire. And he knew Officer Sterling. Julian Sterling. A straight-laced, decorated officer who had vanished without a trace in 2005. His disappearance was eventually ruled a probable desertion, a convenient, if unsatisfying, end to an embarrassing internal investigation. No one had ever found his patrol car, and yet, here was his final log. A cold knot tightened in Elias's stomach, a familiar sensation that whispered, "This is why you stay in the archives, Thorne." Because the truly broken things don't stay buried, he took the file upstairs to his cramped, windowless office and dug out a dusty, forgotten cassette player from the bottom drawer of his desk. The machine whirred to life with a dry, mechanical cough as he slid the tape in. He hit play and adjusted the volume. Static hissed, a flat line of radio white noise. Then, a distorted, clipped voice cut through, Julian Sterling's familiar tone, but brittle, edged with something that wasn't panic, but a deep, resonant dread. Unit 77 to dispatch. I've got eyes on the subject. Male, mid-30s, just walking. No, wait. He's not walking on the road, he's just above it. Hovering, barely. A long silence, punctuated only by Sterling's ragged breathing. Dispatch, subject is in the lane of traffic. Requesting backup, non-emergency. Address is the old Blackwood Trestle access road. Something is wrong here. Elias leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees, his eyes fixed on the blank, spinning cassette reel. The photograph of the black-stained seat sat beside the player. Then, the true hook, Sterling's voice changed, dropping to a breathless, terrified whisper, as if speaking directly into the mic, inches away. Oh my God. He's looking at the car. No, not at the car. Through the car. He's smiling, dispatch. And he's not alone. There's a shape in the back seat. Something wet. The sound of a heavy thump against glass. A choked, gurgling gasp. Then, a sudden, high-pitched electronic shriek, a sound Elias couldn't place, metallic and digital, like a ghost trapped in a modem. The tape cut to silence. Elias sat for a full minute in the yellow glow of his desk lamp, the silence of the archive a suffocating weight. He reached out to rewind the tape, His hand shaking, he looked down at the photograph. The stain on the back seat. Not a simple stain. It had the viscous, chaotic pattern of something that had violently materialized and just as violently vanished. Elias Thorne, who didn't believe in ghosts but had seen enough inexplicable things to know horror wore many masks, hit the rewind button. He wasn't just investigating a missing cop anymore. He was staring into the void of a midnight dispatch, and the void had just spoken back. Elias Thorne replayed the cassette 3 times. Each time, the electronic shriek at the end felt sharper, more aggressive, less like static and more like a deliberate, unnatural sound. A signature of whatever had swallowed Julian Sterling. He knew his first step had to be to access Sterling's official desertion file. It took him an hour, navigating the bureaucracy even in the dead of night. But he finally retrieved the thick, official department file. The cover was stamped with 2 ominous words, "Case closed." Inside, the official narrative was clean, clinical, and utterly disconnected from the horror on the tape. Conclusion: Officer Julian V. Sterling, after exhibiting signs of increased professional stress, abandoned Unit 77 on the access road to the Blackwood Trestle at approximately 3:15 a.m., November 17, 2005. The vehicle was later recovered. A subsequent internal investigation found no physical evidence of foul play. Motive suspected: personal/professional duress. Elias scowled, flipping through the pages. The official recovery report of Unit 77 mentioned the car was found abandoned, doors locked, keys in the ignition. No mention of the cassette tape. No mention of a photograph, and critically, no mention of any stain on the back seat. The department's photos of the vehicle interior were included. Elias held the grainy, official Polaroid up next to the mysterious glossy print he had found in the archives. The official photo, pale blue upholstery, immaculate. The mysterious photo, the same back seat, date stamped just minutes after the official abandonment time, with that unsettling, black, glistening residue. Someone had found the car before the department did, or someone had cleaned the evidence before the official photographers arrived. And they had deliberately filed the crucial items away under a false name, the Void Dispatch. Elias grabbed his keys. He didn't need a warrant, he needed a shovel and a flashlight. He was going to the Blackwood Trestle. The drive out of Havenwood was silent, the city's scattered streetlights fading into the oppressive darkness of the surrounding state forest. The Blackwood Trestle was an abandoned railway bridge, a crumbling monument to a forgotten timber industry, known locally as a spot for teenage dares and quiet suicides. He found the access road, a deeply rutted gravel track that hadn't seen maintenance in 2 decades. He parked and activated his high beams, the twin cones of light cutting through the thick, damp fog that clung to the trees. He walked 50 yards down the road, flashlight beam sweeping across the wet gravel. Then, he saw it dot a section of the embankment where the earth looked disturbed, less overgrown. And directly beside it, embedded deep in the mud, was a faded, half-buried section of blue plastic, the shattered lens of a Unit 77 police light bar. Elias knelt down. He started scraping away the wet earth with his hands. The metallic, ozone smell from the archive folder was strong here, mixing with the sharp scent of pine needles and decay. He uncovered something solid, metallic, and cold. It was a section of the patrol car's back door, the inside panel, ripped violently from the frame, but it was the interior surface that made Elias's blood run cold. It wasn't the uniform pale blue. It was covered in hundreds of tiny, perfect pinprick holes, arranged in concentric, unsettling circles. Like a bizarre, metallic honeycomb, he looked up toward the Blackwood Trestle. Its towering, skeletal silhouette was barely visible in the fog, the iron girders stretching into the void, and then, a sound, not the wind. Not an animal. It was a low, mechanical hum, originating from the darkness directly beneath the trestle. A sound that reminded him sickeningly of the electronic shriek on the cassette tape, just muffled by distance. Elias froze, flashlight pointed at the tree lean. The humming intensified, vibrating subtly in the cold air. He heard the crunch of gravel behind him. Elias spun around, instinctively drawing his service pistol, a standard-issue Glock 17. From its holster, standing at the edge of the access road, illuminated partially by the headlights of Elias's car, was a figure. Tall, slender, dressed in what looked like faded, vintage police blues. "Detective Thorne," the figure said, his voice a low, smooth baritone that somehow cut through the humming. "You shouldn't be here. Some things are closed for a reason." It wasn't Officer Sterling. Elias couldn't make out the face clearly. It was obscured by the shadows and a ridiculously wide-brimmed hat, but he recognized the archaic uniform. It was the uniform of the Havenwood PD, circa 1950. "Who are you?" Elias demanded, keeping his aim steady. The figure took one slow, deliberate step forward, and the humming beneath the trestle spiked in volume. The smell of ozone flared violently. "I am the man who filed the void dispatch," the figure replied. "And I'm telling you, Detective, the trestle takes what it's given. It took Unit 77, and it took Julian. And now, you've disturbed the filing system." Before Elias could respond, the figure raised his hand. Not in threat, but in a gesture of profound, sorrowful warning. That a sudden, powerful surge of cold air hit Elias, chilling him to the bone. The police cruiser's headlights flickered, then died, plunging the access road into absolute darkness. Elias was alone in the void, facing a ghost from the past, standing next to the physical remnants of a monstrous disappearance, with the terrifying, mechanical hum thrumming directly beneath his feet. The sudden, blinding darkness was immediately followed by silence. The humming beneath the trestle stopped. The figure in the antique uniform had vanished as completely as the light. Elias Thorne did not move for a full minute, his Glock still aimed at the empty space where the man had stood. His heart was hammering against his ribs, but his mind, trained by 2 decades of unpredictable urban decay and trauma, was already cycling through possibilities. That a ghost? Elias scoffed internally. No. An elaborate, deeply committed prank, or an extremely territorial evidence custodian. But how did the man know about the void dispatch folder? And how did he cut the power to the cruiser so instantly? He slowly lowered his weapon and fumbled for his small tactical flashlight, clicking it on. The beam barely pierced the thick, cold fog. The car was dead. Completely. Not even the dome light would turn on. Elias backed away from the abandoned wreckage and the ominous, metallic scent. He had to get confirmation on the figure. The police records department held personnel files dating back to the 1940s. He knew where to look. An hour later, Elias was back in the main station, heart still thumping, the cold of the Blackwood Trestle still clinging to his clothes. He was hunched over a microfilm reader, winding through the brittle, yellowed pages of old personnel records. He searched for names associated with the police uniform of the 1950s. He searched for anyone who had worked in the archives or evidence room in the years following 2005. He found him. A name jumped out: Marcus Rourke. Archive clerk, served 1951 to 1978, but mysteriously returned to the department in a temporary capacity from 2004 to 2006. Specifically assigned to historical document reorganization. Elias pulled up the personnel photo. The face in the microfilm, pale, serious, clean-shaven, matched the structure of the man he had seen in the dark, minus the deep shadows and the ominous hat, but the file contained a stark, chilling addendum. Handwritten in official blue ink, Rourke requested permanent reassignment to the cold case archives after the successful closing of the Sterling case. Granted. Deceased 2010. Heart attack, on duty, in the archive stacks. Elias stared at the microfilm. The man who had filed the tape in the photograph, the man who had confronted Elias at the trestle, the man who knew everything about the void dispatch, was officially dead. And had been for 15 years. He ran a hand over his face. This was no prank. This was no disgruntled former colleague. This was precisely the kind of baffling, reality-bending anomaly he had specialized in avoiding. He looked at the official desertion file again, then at the glossy photograph of the stained back seat. He needed a forensic analysis of that stain, and he needed it now. He sealed the tape, the photograph, and the piece of the car door panel in a new evidence bag. He wasn't taking this to the regular forensics lab. He was going to his contact, Dr. Lena Sharma, a brilliant, disgraced biochemist who ran a private, high-tech lab on the edge of town. The only person Elias trusted with evidence that might defy explanation. The next morning, the sun was barely clearing the horizon when Elias walked into Lena's lab. The air smelled of formaldehyde and copper. Lena, a woman with piercing, intelligent eyes and a deep skepticism for anything mundane, didn't even look up from her electron microscope. "You look like you've seen the kind of cold case that actually chills things, Thorne," she noted, her voice flat. Elias pushed the evidence bag across the stainless steel table. "I need you to tell me what this black residue is." It was on the back seat of Julian Sterling's abandoned patrol car in 2005. Lena looked at the glossy photo, then at the cassette tape, and finally at the strangely perforated metal car door panel. She raised a skeptical eyebrow. "This metal, these perforations are perfectly circular. Almost laser precise. Not impact damage." She picked up the photo. "And this residue. It looks like dried blood, but the texture, it's too homogeneous." She took a sterile swab and scraped a minuscule sample from the metallic residue clinging to the door panel. "I'll run the full spectrum. But tell me the full story, Elias. I don't work on half-truths." Elias recounted everything: the tape, the shriek, the deceased archivist Marcus Rourke, and the chilling warning at the trestle. Lena listened in silence, occasionally nodding slowly. When Elias finished, she was already hunched over the microscope. "The humming," she murmured, more to herself than to him. "The specific metallic smell." Rourke's reemergence. She pulled away from the lens, her expression one of profound unease. She met Elias's eyes, the usual cynicism gone, replaced by a deep, calculating fear. "Elias," she said, her voice dropping to a low, intense whisper, "the residue is not biological. It's silicon-based. A synthetic polymer, yes. But here's the kicker: it contains trace elements of an isotope of polonium-210, an incredibly rare, highly radioactive element. And this specific polonium signature, it's consistent with a known experimental failure point in early Cold War era, high-frequency teleportation research." She pointed to the metal panel. "And those holes? They were caused by something phasing through the object. That stain is whatever was used to lubricate the phase shift." Elias felt a dizzying lurch in his gut. The trestle wasn't just a site of abandonment. It was a site of intrusion. Julian Sterling didn't run away, Elias stated, the realization a cold hammer blow. "No," Lena confirmed grimly. Julian Sterling had a creature, or an object, teleport into his back seat, and whatever it used left that residue. And judging by the frequency signature on the tape, Officer Sterling wasn't just observing a man hovering above the road. He was observing a dimensional seam opening. And someone, Elias Rourke, has been trying to keep the lid on it for 2 decades. She looked back at the door panel, a shiver running down her spine. "I think the Void Dispatch isn't a reference to a destination, Elias. I think it's the source." Dr. Lena Sharma's small, windowless lab suddenly felt immense and terrifying. Elias looked at the samples, the cassette, the glossy photo, the perforated metal, no longer as police evidence, but as fragments of a collision between dimensions. "Polonium-210," Elias repeated, the name tasting like ash. He knew the basics: a lethal alpha emitter, incredibly rare, primarily associated with nuclear applications. "You said Cold War era research." What does that have to do with the Blackwood Trestle and Julian Sterling? Lena tapped at her keyboard, pulling up old, redacted government documents from a highly specialized, private database. In the late 1950s, a secretive, small-scale physics project codenamed Project Janus was run out of a decommissioned missile silo 70 miles from Havenwood. Their goal was spatial manipulation for rapid deployment. Basically, a primitive teleportation system. She spun the monitor around. The schematic displayed a massive, complex energy conduit system. One section was labeled High Mass Displacement Field Generator Trestle Anchor. They needed an anchor point for the field, a massive, stable, iron structure to ground the energy surge. The Blackwood Trestle, built 100 years ago with dense, old-growth iron, fit the bill perfectly, Lena explained. The polonium-210 isotope? It was a byproduct of their attempts to create a high-density, low-radiation loop to minimize resistance during the phasing process. It failed spectacularly. They shut the project down and buried the research. And, apparently, they forgot about the anchor. Elias was staring at the screen. The humming he had heard, the electronic shriek on the tape, it wasn't some supernatural sound. It was the sound of a defunct dimensional machine powering up. And Marcus Rourke? Elias asked, connecting the dead archivist to the Cold War project. Rourke, Lena said, her gaze hardening, was likely part of the cleanup crew. He was the only one in the department who knew about the Janus link to the trestle. When Unit 77 went missing near the anchor, Rourke didn't file it as a standard disappearance. He labeled it the Void Dispatch and hid the physical evidence, knowing the truth would ignite a massive government investigation. She pointed back to the cassette tape. Julian Sterling didn't just stumble upon a vagrant. He stumbled upon the trestle anchor actively engaging a residual phase shift. Something came through. Elias felt a primal need to go back, but with more than a sidearm. What are the risks now? Rourke warned me off. The polonium-210 has a relatively short half-life, Lena said, pushing her glasses up her nose. But the energy source at the trestle is clearly not decaying. It's residual energy, being triggered by something. That perforated metal you brought in? The density of the whole pattern suggests whatever came through was trying to occupy the back seat all at once. The car's metal structure resisted, causing a violent, messy materialization failure, hence the synthetic residue. Elias stood up, strapping his gun belt tighter. He had to find what Julian Sterling saw, and he knew where to start the real investigation, the personnel files Rourke was guarding. Rourke told me the trestle takes what it's given, Elias muttered. I need to know what Sterling was given. He returned to the Havenwood PD archives, using his badge to bypass the overnight security. He headed straight for the section where Rourke's official work logs were stored. He found Rourke's private, unauthorized ledger, a small, leather-bound book hidden behind a loose floorboard in the archive manager's office. The handwriting was the same precise script that labeled the cassette entry, November 18, 2005. Filed the dispatch. The thing took Sterling. It wasn't a man, not a creature. It was a projection, a distortion. A reflection of the trestle's inherent instability. The car was found 1 mile down the road. It seems to have forced the phase shift out of the vehicle, violently. The residue is volatile. The department believes the lie, Elias. Flipped pages until he found an entry from 1998, the same year as the missing person he was initially searching for. Entry, July 4, 1998. They found the boy's clothes near the trestle. No body. The pattern is different. No polonium trace. Just gone. Clean phase shift. The trestle demanded a subject, and the subject obeyed. It is not an anchor, it is a drain. The final entry, dated shortly before Rourke's death in 2010, was a shaky, frantic scrawl, "It's getting worse. The humming is constant now. It's localized around the old rail line. The dispatch is no longer random. It's seeking. It's looking for Unit 77's energy signature. They left the car, but the log is alive. I have to protect the dispatch. If it finds the log, it finds the way back in." Elias looked at the cassette tape, the final log of Unit 77, sitting in his briefcase. Rourke hadn't filed the log to hide it from the police. He had hidden it from the Trestle. And Elias had just pulled it out of its safe harbor. He was holding the key to whatever cosmic mechanism was anchored beneath the Blackwood Trestle. And he was about to use it. He had to find out what the clean phase shift was, the boy from 1998 who had simply vanished. His file might contain the clues to the Trestle's demand. Elias returned to the public archives, now searching not for the void dispatch, but for the seemingly unrelated missing person case from Rourke's ledger, case file 98 to 107, Andrew Andy Reed. The file was thin, cold, and definitively closed. Andy Reed, age 14, vanished in July 1998. The only evidence found, a discarded backpack, a pair of worn sneakers, and a tattered, waterproof raincoat, all neatly stacked beside the Blackwood Trestle access road. The official conclusion: probable drowning. The report stated the boy, known to take risks, must have slipped from the treacherous trestle girders and been swept away by the Blackwood River. His body never recovered. Elias focused on Rourke's private note: clean phase shift. The trestle demanded a subject, and the subject obeyed. He looked closer at the witness statements. Andy's parents were distraught, but one statement caught Elias's eye, from Andy's younger sister, Clara Reed, then age 10. Clara claimed Andy was obsessed with the trestle. Not because of the thrill, but because he believed it sang. She stated, "He said it makes a song that only he can hear. A low, metal song. He said he was going to listen to it one last time before we moved." Elias realized that the humming he and Rourke had heard wasn't a mechanical failure. It was a rhythmic, audible frequency that had been drawing subjects for years. He found Clara Reed. She was now a librarian in the neighboring town of Fairview, a quiet, reserved woman in her late 30s. Elias called her immediately, omitting the bizarre details about dimensional phasing and dead archivists. He simply said he was reviewing old cold cases. "Clara, about the song Andy mentioned," Elias asked over a secure line. "Did he ever say what the song was about?" A long silence stretched across the phone line. "The song," Clara finally whispered, her voice fragile, "it was never a happy song, detective. Andy said it was a counting song." "Counting down." "Counting down to what?" "He said it was counting the seconds until the quiet time came for him," she replied, a fresh wave of grief in her tone. "He said if you stood on the trestle on the hottest night of the year, exactly at midnight, the song would tell you when the quiet time would take you and make you clean." Elias checked the date of Andy's disappearance, July 4th, 1998. One of the hottest nights on record that year. Midnight. A clean phase shift. The Trestle's demand: Andy Reed hadn't fallen. He had voluntarily stepped into the dimensional seam, drawn by the Trestle's frequency. Elias hung up and immediately contacted Lena. "Lena, I need you to cross-reference the polonium frequency on Sterling's tape with the general frequency of the Trestle's iron structure. I think the Trestle isn't just an anchor, it's a beacon that emits a low-level, resonant frequency, the song, that influences highly stressed or susceptible individuals." Minutes later, Lena was back on the line, her voice urgent. "You're right, Elias. The Trestle's iron girders are resonating with a naturally occurring low-frequency harmonic, but it peaks drastically at certain times, like the early morning of July 4th and the morning Julian Sterling vanished. It's a bioacoustic frequency, Elias. It doesn't just attract, it compels." "And Sterling's tape? The shriek at the end?" "It wasn't the Trestle. It was the polonium residue reacting to the sound of Sterling's radio mic being opened. The polonium loop is a feedback loop. It's designed to lock onto any transmitting frequency near the phase shift. Julian Sterling's open mic, recording the chaos, is now chemically and dimensionally linked to the trestle. Elias's blood ran cold. The final log of Unit 77 wasn't just a recording, it was a tethered. Rourke's words echoed, "If it finds the log, it finds the way back in." The thing that materialized violently in Unit 77's back seat didn't completely succeed. It left residue and took Sterling as a messy, partial phase shift. But if that thing could hear the final log, it could use the polonium's frequency. Connection to stabilize the dimensional scene, and phase back in, fully and cleanly, and Elias was holding the log. He grabbed the cassette tape. He had to destroy it, but just as he reached for a hammer, his police radio crackled to life. It was dispatch, its voice strained, filled with static, the exact, terrifying static that preceded Sterling's voice on the tape. Unit 77, the voice hissed, distorted and broken, sounding impossibly close to the static on the cassette. Unit 77. Do you copy? Subject is back at the trestle. The quiet time is here. Final log required. Elias dropped the tape, scrambling for his actual police radio. Dispatch, this is Detective Thorne. Repeat last transmission. I don't see any Unit 77. The dispatch operator's voice, clear now and panicked, cut through the static. Detective Thorne. What are you doing? I haven't transmitted for the last 5 minutes. Are you receiving a rogue frequency? Elias looked at the cassette player, then at the static-laced radio. The trestle was already using the Unit 77 log's frequency to mimic the dispatch. It was probing, looking for the signal. He had a few seconds before the thing realized the log was stationary. He had to move. He had to take the lure back to the trestle. Elias didn't hesitate. He snatched up the cassette tape and the fragment of the perforated car door, shoved them into a shielded evidence pouch, a futile gesture, he knew, and bolted out of the station. He called Lena Sharma from his personal cell as he drove, speeding through the thinning morning fog. Lena, listen to me. The trestle is actively calling the Unit 77 frequency. It just impersonated dispatch. It knows the log is out. Elias, stop. Lena's voice was sharp with fear. Rourke was trying to protect the log. If you bring it back to the trestle, you are confirming the location for whatever is trying to phase through. You're stabilizing the anchor. I have to, Elias gritted out, gripping the steering wheel. If I destroy the tape here, the polonium link might destabilize the phasing in a random, catastrophic way. If I take it to the trestle, I can control the point of entry. It wants the log, I'll give it the log, but on my terms. What terms, Elias? What's your plan? I'm going to overload it, he said, pushing the engine past its limit. You told me the polonium is a feedback loop, reacting to transmitting frequencies. I'm going to use the highest frequency transmitter I can find near the trestle, and I know where one is. Elias was heading toward the old Havenwood Amateur Radio Club building, a dilapidated shack a quarter-mile from the trestle. Its antenna array, designed for long-distance broadcast, was massive, crude, and immensely powerful. He pulled up to the shack, the early morning light struggling to penetrate the gloom. He kicked in the flimsy lock and found the main console, a vintage, tube-powered monster. Lena, I need the frequency. What's the polonium-210 residue's natural resonance signature? A brief pause, then Lena's voice, strained but professional. The resonance is extremely high, Elias. Around 2.1 gigahertz. The old ham radio equipment won't reach that high. It's designed for kilohertz, not gigahertz. Elias looked at the antique console. She was right. He couldn't blast the right frequency. He needed proximity and raw power. He pulled the Unit 77 cassette tape out of the pouch. He inserted it into a portable player he'd grabbed from the police station and placed it directly against the massive, unshielded main broadcast tube of the ham radio. I can't match the frequency, Lena, but I can match the wattage. I'm going to run raw power through this tape's location. If the polonium is linked to the location, the energy surge should incinerate the chemical signature and disrupt the dimensional anchor. Elias, that's insanely risky. You'll be standing right next to the antenna when the trestle responds. It's already responding, Lena, Elias said, looking out the shack's dusty window. The Blackwood Trestle was suddenly visible, not through the fog, but above it. A faint, oily green glow now emanated from the underside of the iron structure. And the ground beneath Elias's feet began to hum, not the quiet, musical hum Andy Reid heard, but a bone-shaking, electrical thrum. Elias threw the main power switch on the ham radio console. The old tubes flared, hissing violently. The lights in the shack dimmed, sucking power from the entire local grid. The cassette player, vibrating violently against the broadcast tube, began to play. The static, then Julian Sterling's terrified whisper. He's smiling, dispatch. And he's not alone. There's a shape in the back seat. Something wet. The trestle responded instantly. The humming beneath the earth turned into a deafening wail. Outside the shack, the air shimmered, thick and hot, smelling of ozone and the familiar, metallic tang of the polonium residue. A dimensional seam, a ripple of distorted air that looked like heat rising from asphalt, began to form directly on the wooden floor, 3 feet in front of the console. Elias braced himself, pistol drawn, aimed at the shimmering distortion. Then, the final, terrifying electronic shriek from the tape played. As the shriek hit the ham radio's broadcast tube, the tube overloaded, exploding with a flash of brilliant white light and a roar of static feedback. The dimensional seam in the shack floor snapped open, widening into a swirling, liquid void of deep, impenetrable black, and through the opening, Elias saw him. Not the spectral figure of Marcus Rourke, but a figure dressed in a police uniform, Unit 77's uniform. Julian Sterling, but Sterling wasn't whole. His body was stretched and warped, his limbs elongated, the blue fabric of his shirt covered in the glistening black residue. His face was a mask of utter, silent terror, and his mouth was locked open in a perpetual, silent scream. Sterling! Elias yelled, dropping his gun. Sterling didn't move. He was floating, half-formed, a distorted projection tethered by the collapsing dimensional seam. But then, Elias saw what was behind Sterling. Deep within the liquid black void, a colossal, geometric structure was visible, a shifting, rotating lattice of impossible angles that defied physics. It wasn't a creature, it was a place. The true void dispatch, and attached to the warped body of Julian Sterling were dozens of fine, glittering black filaments, like high-tech spider silk, pulling Sterling back into the abyss. The filaments pulsed with the same high-frequency light as the polonium. The polonium residue wasn't just a lubricant, it was the wiring for the dimensional drain. The Unit 77 tape was melting against the hot radio tube, but the magnetic strip was still playing the final, dying sound, the shriek, which was now feeding raw energy into the seam. Elias lunged, not for his gun, but for the cassette player. He tore the magnetic tape spool out, wrapping it around his hand, pulling it free from the power source. The moment the tape separated, the connection snapped, the wail from the trestle died. The swirling black seam closed instantly with a final, violent pop, leaving a scorched, circular mark on the wooden floor. Julian Sterling's terrifying, distorted form vanished, pulled back into the void dispatch with the speed of a slammed door. Elias fell back, panting, the metallic scent overwhelming, the magnetic tape burning his hand. He had saved the trestle from fully opening, but Julian Sterling was irrevocably gone. He looked at the scorch mark. The void dispatch had come incredibly close to manifesting. And he knew, with chilling certainty, that the polonium lube, now scattered in trace amounts across the shack, would simply regenerate the link. He had won the battle, but the war for the Havenwood anchor was just beginning. The silence that followed the collapse of the dimensional seam was more unsettling than the screaming static. Elias, coughing from the smoke and the acrid, metallic fumes, staggered back from the ruined ham radio console. The magnetic tape he'd ripped from the cassette player was fused to his skin, leaving a painful, black residue that matched the stain on the patrol car photo. He glanced down at his hand. The black substance wasn't just burnt plastic. It was the polonium lube, the insidious dimensional wiring, now contaminating his very body. Polonium-210 has a half-life of only 138 days, he remembered Lena saying. But the energy source at the trestle is clearly not decaying. Its residual energy, being triggered. Elias was a walking trigger now. He got back into his police cruiser, which, inexplicably, had power again. The trestle's momentary power surge had been so intense it had apparently shocked the car's electrical system back to life. He sped back to Lena's lab, clutching the scorched, remaining spool of the Unit 77 tape, the final, volatile remnant of the log. Lena took one look at his hand and swore violently in a language Elias didn't recognize. "That's not just surface contact, Elias," she said, quickly ushering him into a decontamination shower. "You absorbed it. It's in your dermis. The alpha particles are shielded by your skin, for now, but the polonium is now part of your personal energy signature. You're an active relay." As she worked on cleaning and shielding his hand, Elias explained what he saw. Julian Sterling, a warped, screaming sentinel, tethered by polonium filaments to a colossal, geometric structure deep within the void. The structure, Lena mused, her eyes wide with horrified understanding. That's the void dispatch itself. It's not a place for things to enter, Elias. It's a mechanism to keep things out. Project Janus was a clumsy attempt to open a wormhole. But the trestle's natural resonance, the song, it's a dimensional drain that pulls things into that structure to stabilize our reality. She paused, looking at the door panel with the perforated holes. The thing that tried to enter Unit 77, the one that left the heavy polonium trace, it wasn't trying to invade. It was a failed escapee. Julian Sterling drove his car into a dimensional quarantine zone, and whatever was trapped in the void tried to use his vehicle's energy to phase out, fully. Sterling was taken in the ensuing struggle, dragged into the prison, where he's now part of the mechanism. Elias looked at his contaminated hand. And Rourke? The dead archivist? Rourke was the warden, Lena concluded. He wasn't trying to cover up a desertion. He was protecting the world from the void dispatch using bureaucracy. He filed the evidence away, cutting the polonium tether, the tape, off from the anchor. And now I've brought the evidence back and activated the antenna, Elias finished grimly. And I'm a beacon for the next phase shift. Lena finished applying a thick, lead-lined patch to his hand. The biggest problem now isn't the polonium's decay. It's its regeneration. That residue is designed to replicate, feeding off ambient electrical energy. It will look for the highest power source nearby to complete its cycle. Elias knew instantly where the trestle's true power source lay. Not the abandoned ham radio shack, but the beating heart of Havenwood. The old hydroelectric dam. It sits on the Blackwood River, less than a mile downstream from the trestle, Elias said. It's the oldest, biggest power source in the valley. If the polonium lube residue regenerated there, the trestle would have an inexhaustible, stable power supply to keep the dimensional seam open permanently. We have to beat the residue to the dam, Elias declared. I need to know the next peak resonance time. When is the trestle's song at its loudest? Lena frantically worked the calculations, cross-referencing astronomical data with the trestle's structural integrity reports. The next peak is scheduled for 3:07 a.m., Lena announced, her voice shaking. It's the exact timestamp on the photo you found. The moment Julian Sterling was taken. The trestle has an alarm clock, Elias. A 20-year-old alarm clock. Elias checked his watch. It was 11 p.m. They had 4 hours. I need something to shut down a dam, Lena. Something big. And I need a way to neutralize the polonium, permanently. Lena looked at the remaining scrap of the Unit 77 tape, the core evidence that had started this entire nightmare. The key is the Unit 77 tape, Elias. It created the initial lock. The only thing that can break the connection completely is a massive, controlled, counter-frequency pulse and inverse dispatch. How do we generate that? Lena smiled, a grim, determined curve of the lips. She pulled out a prototype device, a complex, pulsing array of wires and crystals powered by a small, repurposed nuclear battery. Project Janus was shut down, but the science wasn't lost. I've been reverse engineering their field generator for years. We can't destroy the trestle, but we can hit the dimensional anchor with a counter-frequency pulse at the exact moment of peak resonance. It will collapse the polonium filaments, but only if we feed the last remaining piece of the Unit 77 tape into the pulse. Elias took the device. The dam is the target. The pulse is the solution. And I'm the one who carries the antenna. He looked at his lead-patched hand, the mark of the void dispatch. He was a cop chasing a ghost that turned out to be a dimensional prison, and he had to use a piece of evidence to perform a science fiction exorcism. Elias and Lena drove towards the Havenwood hydroelectric dam, a massive structure of mossy concrete and roaring water that dominated the narrow canyon of the Blackwood River. The air grew colder, thick with the spray of the river and the growing, familiar metallic odor of ozone. The clock is ticking, Elias, Lena said, clutching the inverse dispatch device. 3:07 a.m. We need to be inside the generator hall before then. And remember, the polonium on your hand is a localized, unstable power source. If you get too close to the main turbine, you could trigger a premature phase shift. They reached the security gate. It was locked, but the old chain link was no match for a dedicated cop with a heavy-duty bolt cutter. Inside the compound, the noise of the rushing water and the colossal turbines was deafening. The massive generator hall was a cavern of humming energy, the perfect, stable power supply the polonium was seeking. Elias saw the evidence immediately across the polished concrete floor, radiating outward from the main conduit connecting the massive T1 turbine to the grid, was a faint, almost invisible spiderweb of glistening black. The polonium loop was actively regenerating, growing from trace elements into a massive, conductive network, heading straight toward the highest energy source. It's fast, Elias shouted over the turbine's roar. It's almost at the main generator coil. We have to get the inverse dispatch device to the step-up transformer. It's the nexus of the energy flow. Lena yelled back, pointing to a large, caged bank of humming, sparking machinery near the far wall. They scaled a maintenance ladder, the vibration of the dam making their ascent precarious. When they reached the catwalk overlooking the transformer bank, the metallic polonium smell was overwhelming. Elias could feel a hot, painful throbbing in his lead-patched hand. The black filaments had reached the transformer. They were adhering to the massive copper windings, shimmering as they sucked energy. The humming in the room spiked, becoming the terrifying, electronic wail from the Unit 77 tape. The air above the transformer began to shimmer, turning that oily, sickly green glow. A dimensional scene was opening right there, in the heart of the city's power source. Now, Elias. Now or it's permanent. Lena shouted. She handed him the inverse dispatch device, a cube of blinking lights and humming crystals, powered by the small nuclear battery. Elias looked at the last remaining scrap of the Unit 77 magnetic tape, the fragile, dark brown plastic that held the terror of Julian Sterling's final moments. I need to put this tape into the coupling mechanism at the last possible moment, Elias said, gripping the device. I need the polonium to be fully engaged with the generator to make the counterpulse hit the anchor effectively. He could see the void dispatch through the shimmering green seam, that colossal, twisting, geometric prison structure, now looking impossibly closer, drawing power from the dam, and then a new figure materialized. Halfway through the scene, it was Marcus Rourke, the deceased archivist, but now he was transparent, ethereal, shimmering with the same sickly green light as the seam. He was a sentinel, a ghostly projection guarding the anchor. Rourke pointed a glowing, spectral finger directly at Elias. You failed, Thorne. You brought the log back. The anchor is stable now. The void dispatch is closing the aperture permanently. You didn't close it, Rourke. You just filed the papers. Elias shouted, stepping onto the metal grating nearest the transformer. His contaminated hand was burning. Rourke didn't speak again. He simply lunged, a translucent, furious entity. Elias didn't fight the ghost. He ran past it, leaping onto the heavy transformer casing. The regenerating polonium filaments immediately attached to his lead-patched hand, stinging him with a massive electrical charge. The time was 3:06 a.m. 1 minute remaining. Elias reached the core coupling of the transformer. He jammed the inverse dispatch device into a massive ventilation grill, wedging it in place. He looked back at the seam. Julian Sterling was visible again, his warped form struggling against the black filaments that held him in the void. 03:07 a.m. The trestle's frequency hit its peak. The entire generator hall roared in response. The seam widened, and the polonium filaments adhering to Elias's hand began to suck his internal energy, his life force. To stabilize the opening, Elias ignored the blinding pain. He took the fragile magnetic tape, the final log of Unit 77, and slammed it into the inverse dispatch device's coupling mechanism. The device instantly activated. The nuclear battery channeled its power into the fragile tape, sending a focused, inverse frequency pulse directly into the massive transformer, using the polonium network as its antenna. A blinding, violet wave of energy erupted from the transformer, vaporizing the polonium filaments in a silent flash. The energy pulse traveled instantly up the Blackwood River, hitting the dimensional anchor beneath the trestle. The geometric structure in the void screamed, a soundless, deafening rupture of reality. The colossal form of the void dispatch convulsed, then collapsed inward on itself. The dimensional seam above the transformer snapped shut with the sound of breaking glass. Julian Sterling vanished completely. Marcus Rourke's spectral form dissolved into nothingness, silence. The sudden, profound silence after the generator noise cut out was absolute. The entire dam was dark. The power was out in Havenwood. Elias slumped against the dead transformer, panting. He had done it. He had collapsed the anchor. He looked at his hand. The lead patch was gone, vaporized by the energy surge. Where the polonium residue had been, there was now only a scar, a faint, perfectly circular mark, like the holes in the patrol car door. He had one. But he knew, as he climbed down the silent, cold ladder, that the void dispatch wasn't gone. It was just unstable, and he was its only surviving link. The lights of Havenwood slowly flickered back on hours later, powered by backup generators. The official report on the dam incident would cite a massive, unexplained surge and an antiquated transformer failure. Elias and Lena made it out undetected, leaving the ruined ham radio shack and the dam disaster to the unsuspecting authorities. Back in Lena's lab, exhaustion was a heavy blanket. Elias's scarred hand throbbed, a constant, dull ache that was a brutal reminder of his new reality. The inverse dispatch worked, Lena confirmed, looking at the readings. The polonium resonance from the trestle is gone. The dimensional anchor is offline. The void dispatch is closed. Closed, or just dormant? Elias asked, staring at the circular scar on his hand, a perfect, pale ring of damaged tissue. Dormant, Lena admitted grimly. And you, Elias, are now the only active relay the system has. The residual polonium that remains in your tissue is still a link. You are, in effect, a portable, unstable dimensional beacon. Elias stood up, stretching his aching back. He was used to carrying the weight of cold cases, but this was a different kind of burden. So, what happens now? We observe. We wait, Lena said, but her expression told a different story. The scar is a phase shift signature. It means you were partially inside the dimensional field. And if Rourke's ledger was right, the trestle doesn't just pull things in, it also projects them. Elias was about to respond when his vision momentarily flickered. The sterile, well-lit lab vanished, replaced by a sudden, total darkness, cold and metallic smelling. Elias felt the agonizing, familiar pressure of the polonium filaments gripping his scarred hand. He heard a voice, thick and slurring, a painful echo of a human scream. Thorn, the log is within the wall. The darkness snapped away. Elias was back in the lab, breathing hard, leaning on the table. Lena was staring at him, horrified. Elias. Your eyes, they went completely white for a second. What did you see? Julian Sterling, Elias whispered, clutching his hand. Or what's left of him. He spoke to me. He said, the log is within the wall. Lena grabbed her digital recorder. The void dispatch isn't just closed, Elias. It's collapsed, and the pressure is causing it to rebound through the nearest active relay, you. Sterling is trying to communicate through the dimensional bleed, using the remaining polonium in your system. The log, Elias mused. The Unit 77 log was the tape. I destroyed it in the pulse. What wall? He looked around the lab, then back at his scar. The words were a riddle delivered by a dimensional prisoner. The wall isn't a physical structure, Lena said, her mind racing. The wall is a barrier. Sterling was a cop. Cops file reports. The log might refer to the original Unit 77 incident report, the one the department officially used to rule his disappearance a desertion. Elias nodded. He had the official desertion report back at his office. The one Rourke had filed, he called the precinct, using his authority to request an immediate, emergency retrieval of the complete contents of the Unit 77 incident report file 05-899. Minutes later, a nervous junior officer dropped the thick file on Elias's desk at the precinct. Elias flipped through the official pages, the clean statements, the recovered vehicle photos, the false conclusion. Everything seemed clean, sterile, and ordinary. The wall was impenetrable, but Elias remembered Rourke's filing methodology. The archivist didn't just hide evidence, he created a separate system. Elias looked at the Unit 77 file's official jacket. He ran his scarred hand along the stiff cardboard. It was heavier than it should be. Elias took a sharp knife and sliced carefully along the inner edge of the jacket. The cardboard wasn't solid, it was 2 layers, carefully glued together. Inside the cardboard wall of the official file, Rourke had hidden one final, terrifying item, a photograph. Not the glossy back seat photo. This was a department portrait, a handsome, smiling Julian Sterling, dated a month before his disappearance, but the eyes had been carefully gouged out with a sharp instrument. And where the eyes had been, Rourke had written one word, in that archaic, precise script. He seized the archives. And beneath the photograph, Rourke had hidden the log, not a cassette tape, but a final, handwritten log page, brittle with age, dated 11/17/2005. Final log, J.V. Sterling. Dispatch, it's not just the man hovering. The polonium is binding to the internal record. The trestle is not draining people. It's draining data. It wants the log, it wants the knowledge. The geometric structure is a library of all those who vanished. It's collecting the data feed of our reality. The moment I vanish, my entire life, my memories, become part of the void dispatch. I can hear Andy Reid's memories in the hum. I must lock my final log away. I must seal the wall. Elias stared at the note. The Void Dispatch wasn't a prison for bodies, it was a data siphon for minds and memory. It collected the final moments of susceptible individuals to learn about the reality it was anchored next to, and it wanted Julian Sterling's complete final log, the full, uncorrupted memory and data feed of his life's last moments. Elias, the active relay, had received that transmission. And now, the Void Dispatch knew where to look for its final piece of the log, Elias Thorne's mind. Elias crumpled the hidden log page, the truth of the Void Dispatch sinking in like an anchor. It was a cosmic data vacuum, and every missing person wasn't just gone, their entire identity, their memories, were being assimilated into that colossal geometric structure. Julian Sterling's struggle was to prevent his final log, his consciousness, from being fully indexed. Rourke's terrifying inscription on the photo, "He seized the archives," meant the Void Dispatch wasn't just anchored to the trestle, it was dimensionally adjacent to the very place where Elias worked, the Cold Case Archives, a repository of forgotten data and unresolved trauma. Elias called Lena, his voice tight with controlled dread. The Void is draining data, Lena, not just mass. It was using the polonium to siphon Sterling's final memories via his radio log. Rourke was trying to wall off the final log, the written one, but the real target is the living data. Elias, you're the living data now. Lena's alarm was palpable over the phone. The polonium residue in your hand is acting as a receiving dish. If you stand too long in the archives, the highest concentration of the data it craves, it will start siphoning your memories, too. You need to leave the precinct now. Elias was already moving, but he stopped at the entrance to the long, dark corridor leading to the archives. He couldn't leave. He was the only one who could stop the trestle's final push. No, Lena. I have to go down there. If the Void is actively trying to drain the archives, I'm the only one with the polonium signature to act as a countercurrent. As he stepped into the archives corridor, the fluorescent lights began to flicker, faster and faster, until the entire hall was strobing violently. The low, familiar hum of the trestle was back, muted but insistent, vibrating in the metal shelves. Elias raised his scarred hand. The circular scar was pulsing, radiating intense heat. He pressed the scar against the metal frame of the nearest filing cabinet, case file 98-402. The hit and run he'd ignored days ago. A shock of pure, raw information slammed into his brain. He saw a flash of a dark blue sedan, a glimpse of a weeping driver, and the smell of cheap whiskey. It was the complete, siphoned memory of the incident, downloaded instantly into his mind. The cabinet now felt cold, dead. It works. Elias yelled into the phone. The polonium can receive the dimensional drain, but I can also use it to pull the data out of the archives. I can starve the Void. He ran down the aisles, touching the spines of the worst, most tragic cold cases. Case file 01-119, the murdered homeless man under the bridge. Elias touched it, and saw a vision of a freezing night, the flash of a dull blade, and the crushing despair of loneliness. Case file 85-220, the failed bank robbery hostage situation. He touched it, and saw the slow-motion terror of a screaming child, the blast of a shotgun, and the acrid smell of gunpowder. He was absorbing the collective trauma and unsolved mysteries of Havenwood, his mind reeling under the weight of decades of tragedy. Every case he touched went silent, its magnetic presence in the archives neutralized, but the sheer speed of the download was agonizing. His head felt like a balloon, stretched and ready to burst. Elias, you're overloading your cognitive functions. You'll break. Lena pleaded. I have to get to the source. Elias gasped, stumbling past the rows of files. He knew the Void wasn't after routine cases. It was after the anomalies. He finally reached the section that Rourke had guarded, the shelves dedicated to the Trestle disappearances. He found the file for Andy Reid, 1998. Elias hesitated, Knowing this was a clean phase shift, the final, complete log, he slapped his hand against the file. The impact was catastrophic. The entire archive went dark, the lights shattering. Elias fell to his knees, his mind flooded not with data, but with a pure, overwhelming consciousness. He saw the geometric structure again, but this time, he was inside it. He was seeing through the eyes of Andy Reid, the vanished boy. He felt the cold iron of the trestle, the wind in his hair, and heard the song of the trestle, a beautiful, seductive, low-frequency wave that promised peace. Then, the final, terrifying moment. Andy stepping willingly into the scene, seeking the quiet time. And as he phased, his consciousness was devoured by the colossal structure. The final memory that slammed into Elias wasn't Andy's, but Julian Sterling's, a flash of Unit 77's interior, the screaming man outside the window, and a single, horrific realization: the void doesn't just collect data. It reassembles it. The next time it phases, it will manifest as the sum of all the memories it holds. Elias screamed, his mind separating the raw data from the warning. He was lying on the floor of the archives, his eyes wide. The humming had stopped. The shelves were cold. He had successfully neutralized the data siphon, but the last memory, Sterling's warning, meant the void dispatch was no longer trying to send out a piece of itself, the thing in the car. It was gathering enough data to manifest a complete, powerful projection based on the memory of the most influential person it had collected, the person who saw the archives, Marcus Rourke. The archivist. The warden, Elias, looked up. Standing at the end of the aisle, where the light struggled to penetrate, was a figure. Tall, slender, dressed in the antiquated police blues, but this time, the figure was opaque, fully formed, and smiling with chilling, total satisfaction. It held a manila folder labeled, Detective Elias Thorne, Final Log. "Welcome, Elias," the projection said, its voice a perfect, terrifying blend of Rourke's baritone and the static whine of the trestle. "Thank you for gathering the data. The archive is clean. The dispatch is complete. And now, the true warden takes over." The projection of Marcus Rourke, stitched together from 2 decades of archived human sorrow and the meticulous, controlling personality of the dead archivist, took a slow, deliberate step forward. The polished floor of the archive squeaked slightly under the weight of a being that shouldn't exist. "You have disrupted the system, Detective Thorne," the projection said, its voice resonating with cold authority. "But you have also perfected the dispatch. By clearing the residual data, you've removed the static. I am now the clean log. The complete warden." Elias backed away, snatching the handwritten final log of J.V. Sterling from the desk. This was the only thing that hadn't been siphoned, the only raw, uncorrupted piece of the Trestle's history. "You're not Rourke," Elias spat, aiming his gun. "You're a parasite, built from his memory." Rourke was weak, the projection countered, the movement of its head impossibly smooth. He was trapped by his morals. He thought he was saving humanity by hiding evidence. "I know the truth, order must be imposed. The Void Dispatch is not a prison, it is a necessary quarantine. It extracts the chaos of unresolved human emotion, the trauma of the cold cases. And now, I need to collect the final, most volatile piece of data, your struggle." The projection raised the manila folder labeled Detective Elias Thorne, Final Log. As it did, the circular scar on Elias's hand began to pulse violently, a signal flare of pain. The projection was trying to initiate a phase shift directly into Elias's consciousness, bypassing the environment. "The polonium in your hand is drawing me in, Thorne," the projection hissed, taking another step. "I will absorb your memories of Julian Sterling, the inverse dispatch, and the Trestle's vulnerability. Then, I will phase back to the void and become permanent, sealing the anchor forever, with myself as the eternal warden." Elias realized the true horror. If the projection returned to the void with Elias's memories, it would gain the knowledge of how to prevent any future attempt at closing the anchor. It would know the frequency, the pulse, and the human weakness. He had to destroy the remaining link, the polonium in his body. Before the siphon completed, he looked at the only things he had: the handwritten log page and the sheer, raw electrical power of the archives. Elias ran toward the large, open-reel tape recorder used for early interrogations, an archaic, high-voltage machine with thick, exposed wires. The projection moved with inhuman speed, manifesting a ghostly replica of a police nightstick made of shimmering green light. It swung down, aiming for Elias's head. Elias ducked, the ghostly stick passing through his shoulder, leaving a burning, freezing pain that felt like an electrical shock. He reached the tape recorder. He ripped the electrical cord from the wall, exposing the raw, frayed copper ends. "You want my log, Rourke?" Elias yelled, clutching the wire in one hand and the precious Sterling log page in the other. "You can have the whole feed. But it's coming with a surge." He slammed the handwritten Sterling log page onto the spinning reel of the tape recorder, where the magnetic tape was still faintly visible. The raw, emotional trauma preserved on the paper, Sterling's final, desperate thoughts, created a localized field of informational chaos. The projection recoiled, the pure human dread of the log temporarily repelling it. "No! That log is corrupted. It's static. It will destabilize the dispatch." Elias took the exposed electrical wires and, with his scarred, polonium-contaminated hand, he pressed the copper ends against the circular scarred. A massive jolt of raw, unshielded electricity slammed into Elias's body. He screamed, his body seizing as the full current of the archive's electrical system channeled through the polonium scar, the active relay. The scar glowed an intense, brilliant white, vaporizing the remaining polonium in his system in a flash of heat and blinding light. The energy surged back into the archives, not as simple electricity, but as a violent, overloading counter-frequency pulse, an internal dispatch. The Rourke projection screamed, a terrible sound of data being corrupted and destroyed. The figure began to break apart, not fading, but fracturing into millions of tiny, shimmering data particles, the siphoned memories of Havenwood's cold cases. The particles swirled violently, pulled toward the magnetic field of the spinning tape recorder where the Sterling log lay. The projection, in its last, fragmented moment, looked at Elias. "I will reform, Thorne. The trestle is patient. The archives will be mine." And then, with a final, violent snap, the projection vanished, the memory data pulled back into a localized, controlled vortex, sealed within the archives. Elias fell to the floor, smoke rising from his hand, the electricity gone. The archives were silent again, the lights out, the air heavy with ozone and spent energy. He had burned out the polonium in his own body, neutralizing the ultimate relay. He was clean. But the memory data of the void dispatch was now sealed inside the walls of the archives, waiting for a new anchor, a new victim, a new dispatch. He looked at his hand. The scar was still there, but it was cold. A reminder. A warning. He grabbed his keys and stumbled out of the precinct, the only officer in Havenwood to solve the cold case that couldn't be filed away. Elias Thorne did not file a report on the dam, the ham radio shack, or the disintegration of the Rourke projection. He couldn't. The official department channels, the very wall Rourke had used to quarantine the truth, would simply reject the data. Instead, Elias did what Marcus Rourke had done decades ago. He performed a cleanup. He called Lena Sharma and gave her the coordinates of the ham radio shack, instructing her to retrieve every trace of polonium residue, every scorched wire, and every piece of corrupted data. Lena, now fully invested in being the scientific ward of the Trestle anomaly, agreed without question. Back at the precinct, Elias used a heavy-duty industrial cleaner to scrub the floor of the cold case archives, not for dirt, but for the invisible, localized data residue left by the Rourke projection. He used a Gauss meter to confirm the shells were electrically neutral, no longer humming with the phantom song of the trestle. The void dispatch was dormant, sealed by a reverse energy pulse and starved of data. But Elias knew the sealing was only temporary. The geometric structure in the void was patient, and the trestle anchor was still made of iron, still resonant. The only difference now was that the void had lost its primary relay, Rourke, and its secondary relay, the polonium on the log tape. He was the tertiary relay, the one who knew the entire system. A week later, Elias officially requested a permanent reassignment within the Havenwood Police Department. He didn't ask for a promotion or a field position, he asked for the position of archive manager, the post left vacant by the deceased Marcus Rourke. His superiors, relieved to move the cynical, difficult detective out of the homicide division and into a quiet, forgotten corner of the building, approved the transfer immediately. Elias cleaned out his old desk and moved into the small, windowless office adjacent to the massive metal shelves. He brought only 3 items with him: his service pistol, kept loaded, not for threats from the living, but from the phasing, the manila folder labeled The Void Dispatch, now empty, filed away as a symbolic victory, a highly specialized, lead-line data storage box, built by Lena Sharma, containing the fragmented, partially destroyed remnants of the Unit 77 cassette tape and the charred, handwritten log page. The only remaining tethers to the void. He sat down in Rourke's old chair, the scent of dust and old metal heavy in the air. He looked at the vast rows of cold case files, the endless data feed that the void dispatch still craved. His scarred hand, clean now but still faintly aching, rested on the filing cabinet. He was the new warden. He was the living, breathing, uncorrupted wall that shielded Havenwood from the dimensional siphon. His duty was clear: to manage the data, ensuring no single file ever became compelling enough, or volatile enough, to attract the Trestle's attention again. He would have to live in the silence, constantly listening for the return of the hum. He would never again leave the archives unattended. He would be the one to intercept the rogue frequencies, to quietly destroy any evidence of a clean phase shift, and to deliberately introduce static into the bureaucratic process to confuse the unseen cosmic forces. Elias Thorne, the detective who specialized in the cases that made no sense, had found the one case that made too much sense: the order of the void dispatch. And he had chosen to become part of the system he had fought. The phone on his desk rang, the archive's internal line, a sound that rarely happened after midnight. Elias picked it up on the first ring. "Archives," he answered, his voice low and steady. "Manager Rourke," a nervous rookie's voice asked. "Sorry, sir, I mean, Manager Thorne. We have an officer reporting a strange incident